Okay, the stream is switched over. People of the YouTube, please let us know when you can hear us. Here is the agenda. I think it's been over a month since we've had this call. A lot of good stuff in the meantime. DevCon's fun. Lots of fun progress on research, specs, and all sorts of stuff. So we'll get into it. The first item on the agenda is testing and release updates. I released V084 today. It's a long time coming. It was primarily some testing updates based off of some of the consensus issues that we found at Interop, and along with the networking updates that were also primarily driven at Interop, include chunking listed responses for better streaming or for enabling streaming, and modifying some of the message structures to better facilitate sync, and some other clarifications. We can talk about some of this maybe during research and just general conversation, but we are staging an upcoming semi-major release. There are a number of PRs that are under review. Some of these things are stuff that's come out of audits. For example, hardening up the fork choice rule against some of the attack vectors found by Ruya. But also some other stuff which are some substantive changes to phase 0 with respect to removing the cross-linking scaffolding such that we can continue development while we iron out the actual direction we're going to take on phase 1. Anyway, so there's a lot of stuff under review right there. If you can and have the desire to take a look at some of the stuff and give me some feedback. Anyway, the next thing on testing is Proto has an announcement. I think maybe you might have seen it on Twitter this morning or this evening. Take a look.
Right. Sorry for the noise in the background. I'm at the airport. So yes, in Twitter I shared this diagram about infrastructure that was programmed just before DevCon. During DevCon and the conference in Taipei after was too busy to launch. But now that everything is calming down, I'm planning to onboard clients on this testing infrastructure and do this conformance testing of all the clients in parallel. And then in the next week or two, I'll reach out to clients and ask them to help with the build scripts for the individual state transitions. That was it.
Cool. Thanks, Proto. Proto's been very actively working on this since Interop, and I'm excited as we move towards testnets to see it get used. Thanks, Proto. Next up is an update from Mehdi on fuzzing.
Hey everyone. So as you all probably know, Sigma Prime picked up the work started by Guido on the differential fuzzer for Eth2. So we now have the differential fuzzer working for the block processing, the block header processing, attestation processing, and shuffling. So this is all working on the latest version of the spec. Where it's actually no longer the latest, but it's up and running, matching the spec 8.8.
There were 0 substantive changes to the state transition and some of the core stuff in that
Perfect.
V084, so we should be good to go.
Should be all good. We have modified the block fuzz target last week to allow clients to essentially load the beacon state from file. So we now have a pre-processing function that uses a state ID reference, and we're essentially passing the relevant state to all the fuzz targets. So this was a decent re-architecturing of the way we handle the corpus for both the beacon state and the blocks. So so far we have ZRNT, PySpec, and Lighthouse on these fuzzers. PySpec is very slow, so we're probably going to want to remove it when deploying to a production fuzzing infrastructure. We're also tweaking the fuzzer to ensure consistency and consistent behavior across different implementations when returning empty bytes as opposed to uninitialized pointers. We're also working on adding the epoch state transitions. So currently looking at process justification and finalization, process crosslinks, process final updates, and so on. So this should be fairly straightforward since these functions only take a beacon state as an input. We're also exploring creating custom mutators. These are also can also be seen as libfuzzer plugins to enable struct-aware mutation-based fuzzers. So this would help greatly with coverage. And there's another alternative that we could also potentially use is leverage the lib protobuf mutator, also known as LPM, which would essentially help us translate a decoded SSZ object into a protobuf and back. So for us to make an informed decision, we need accurate coverage measurement. So we decided to focus on that. So that's something that we're currently working on. So while we're doing this, this would essentially allow us to generate and mutate beacon states rather than sticking with known valid states. We're also adding support for more beacon state inputs by essentially adding the post state into the list of the known valid states that we feed libfuzzer as the input corpora. And finally, we've started reaching out to some of you guys to onboard additional implementations. So we're looking at onboarding NIM, hopefully in the very, very near future, this week or next. Then we'll move on to Go, Java, and JavaScript.
Cool. Thank you for the update, Mehdi. Any questions regarding fuzzing before we move on? Cool. Excited to keep that moving. Great. We will move on to client updates. Let's start with Lighthouse.
Hey, double lighthouse. Alrighty, so I'll start with Ages. This one's a bit long, I'm sorry, but I'll try and keep it short and sweet. So Age has been working with Felix to get a standard disk V5 spec without topics going. He's updated the Rust code to a new spec, and he's tested cross compatibility with the reference Go code. Edge is talking to Prism about how to test out discoveries, and they've also updated to latest Go code. And Pawan is working on a basic implementation of topics, which is not yet merged. From my side, I've been working on F1 linking, mostly there. Created a couple of spec issues for some unspecified behavior when making F1 votes if things are going wrong. Also raised an interesting attack this morning about where you can potentially feasibly attain a dishonest majority in the first two epochs after Genesis. It's easily patched though. And I'm also working to build Genesis off Prism's deposit contract. I'm pretty close, but still not quite there. Probably tomorrow or tonight. Scott is working on slashing protection for the validator client. He's come up with a nice tidy scheme. Kirk found some other solid optimizations in the Rust BLS library. And at the same time, we're also building some basic Rust bindings to Harumi to see if it's worth us switching over to. And what might affect people trying to do interop is we're going to change the way that you run Lighthouse. So we're going to presently the validator client and beacon node are separate binaries. We're going to move them under the one binary called Lighthouse. So it's going to feel a lot more like parity with their subcommands. And that's it from me.
Cool. Thanks, Paul.
With regards to the slashing protection, do you guys have that documented somewhere? Like what your approach is?
We do actually. Scott meticulously documented it. So I'll share it with you if you're nice to me.
You might be earning a beer like that.
My man.
Cool. Great. Let's move on to Artemis.
Hey, how's it going? We have made some BLS signature improvements. Ben has been working on that. Shahan has been doing, the noise JVM implementation is complete now. We're working on implementation of Handle for our client. We're mostly doing code cleanup and handing off to our prod dev team. Um, we're working to merge with Harmony. That's just kind of like going through the HR stuff for that. And we're implementing some benchmarks. So if we make changes to like block processing or epoch processing, we can tell right away if there's been any kind of change in the speed of that. And that's it.
Just if I can just add, Joe, the BLS stuff I've been working on specifically is implementing the new hash to curve standard. It's more or less complete. I'm more or less happy-ish with performance. If any teams want to take a look at it in Java, then it's on our Artemis GitHub as a draft pull request at the moment. So feel free to take a look and give me any feedback.
Nice.
Great.
Cool. Thanks, guys. Let's move on to Harmony. I know there's a merger in process, but for now, I know there's like kind of efforts going on in both camps, so we'll just keep updates. Do 2 updates for now. Harmony?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Hey. Yeah, as Joey said, we are figuring out our immersion with Artemis, which our both teams are excited about. This is one of the priorities at the moment. We also continue to work on fork choice tests. It's going to be tests for our implementation of the fork choice spec. Actually, it's almost done. I guess it will be finished next week. And it probably would be a good start to make some test vectors and share them with the community and have fork choice tests on the shared repository as well as tests as we have for state transition part. Also, we are now finishing our Discovery v5 implementation. It's already done, but now working on test coverage, and our current goal is to get interrupt with the get implementation, and yeah, after that it would require some refactor, but yeah, it's almost done, and but it doesn't contain a topic discovery part yet. Anton is working on some GVM with P2P follow-ups, and I think they are about to release a new version, including noise and some refactor. So that's probably it. Thanks.
Cool. Thanks, Mikhail. Prismatic. Oh, wait.
Yeah,
Cool.
can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, so we're just working on hardening up our test net, finding bugs along the way and fixing the bugs. We also have an experimental PR working on removing the shard and cross link across our code base. I'm a big fan of such change. And so we're fixing a unit test for that. And next step is try it out in the runtime. We also started implementing the naive aggregation strategy as well. And yeah, we are like another fan of that change, because we think it's gonna help with syncing with regards to a station a lot. And we also getting a Halloumi BOS library to pass the spread tests, and then it's even faster than the previous Kilnick library that we mentioned a few weeks ago. And just a couple minor things we're working on utilizing the new SSD caching library. We also implemented the process epoch optimization, which was inspired by the Lighthouse talk during DevCon. And then we're working on Osprey testing, and we started working on end-to-end testing, and then looking into fast testing strategies. And yeah, that's about it.
Cool. Thanks, Terrence. Lodestar.
Yeah. So we this past week we brought on a new team member named Tuyen, and he's been contributing, and we finally brought him on more officially. We kind of have a lot of small things in progress where the name of the game is optimization. So we're optimizing our state transition logic. We're kind of refactoring, pulling it out into a separate package. We are finishing up our disk v5 implementation. We are trying to fix up our networking to comply with the new, the new release of the spec, like as of today, but we were working on it before. And working on just adding kind of a general caching mechanism that we can use kind of across the board, caching recent states and things like that. And in the coming weeks, we'll just be kind of trying to finish those things out and get to a kind of a stable place so we can start participating in a testnet.
Cool, thanks, Gamer. Nimbus.
Before I start, I will mention that Mami has created an organization on GitHub called Ethereum 2 Clients, and the idea of this organization is that it would be a suitable place to store the scripts that we developed during interop to run testnets between the multiple clients. And then it could also host other useful projects such as low-level gossip sub chat, so we can test the lip2p implementations for conformance. So all the teams should have received invite for this, for being admins, and once you are an admin, you can add more people from your team. So moving on to updates, we've been working on Eth2.0 integration. We are pretty much wrapping this up, and we are looking forward to participating in a shared testnet with a contract deployed on Goerli. Right now we have implemented the latest spec 0.84, but I guess the consensus here will be that the crosslinks simplification will be included in this shared testnet. I'll be expecting feedback from everyone. Otherwise, we've been also adding a lot of metrics to Nimbus, and we plan to have a public Grafana instance once the testnet is running. And we'll be running probably like 80 or 100 nodes on a server cluster, and we'll be exposing the metrics from that. There's been significant progress in our native lip2p implementation. We are still using the daemon, but we've made the first steps towards integrating the native one. So it will be possible in the near future to switch between the two implementations in Nimbus. Jacek wanted to share that the NCOI tool that he has developed during interop is now much more refined. It's already sitting in the master branch. So if anyone is curious to use it, you can find it there. We've also developed a fuzzing framework, which allows us to use AFL, American Fuzzy Loop, and libfuzzer with programs developed in NIM. And we are just testing the waters so far, but the initial focus will be on the lower level layers components such as cryptography, SSD serialization, and so on. And we'll be gradually moving on to the high level components. We hope to integrate with the Sigma prime differential fuzzer soon. And finally, we've had to spend some time integrating and switching to NIM 1.0, which was released just a few weeks ago. And actually, we had to switch to the very latest version, which was released yesterday. So Nimbus will be soon compatible with NIM 1.2. And that's it.
Great, thank you. Trinity.
Hello. So after DevCon, our team is working on making pilot P2P implementation more complete, and Alex has a PR about making the default protocols be set in the pilot P2P side, and it's being merged. We also fixed the current beacon chain sinker in Trinity, and for the Python synchronized module migration, the Trinity team is planning to migrate from the Sync.io to Trio for a while, and we'll try to implement in Trio in our new modules. And one of these might be the Eth2.0 monitor. So it would be a new process or a new component in the Trinity side to query the info from the Eth2.0 chain data so that we can build the we can listen to the Eth2.0 chain and also for the vote and also for the deposit data. And as a Python client, we are still handling the performance issues. So Yannick has been working on reworking the PySSD data storage, and the PyPP performance is also in our radar recently. And I think that's our update. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. I think that was everyone, right? No, Wei is here. Hey, Wei.
Yeah, so sorry I wasn't in the meeting for last month. I was there was a business trip for me for nearly a month, and unfortunately around that time I wasn't quite able to get much done. But last month we finished the interop, and this week I'm finally able to get on with everything again, and I'm fixing one or two remaining issue of the interop, and hopefully to try to join some of the current other clients testnet, and also to just fix those issues in testing. And on the substrate part, I'm trying to get the Casper consensus engine. It turns out there was some design issues, so I'm trying to fix that as well. Yeah, but that's basically update from Casper party.
Cool. Thanks, Wei. Glad to have you back. Okay, I think that is everyone. We will move on to research updates. There's been a lot of movement discussion around the phase 1 proposal. Vitalik, I think, discussed this at length in various workshops and things at DevCon, and there's a lot of posts online. Essentially, it makes a trade-off to have fewer shards, at least to start, but the ability to cross-link in the best case every shard, every slot, to facilitate single slot time intra-shard communications, cross-shard communications. I don't think we need to go super in-depth into it today. The primary implication is that it changes some of the phase 0 machinery that we had in place for crosslinks. In retrospect, pretty obviously, we were kind of prematurely putting that in the spec anyway. So I have a phase 0 spec update PR that just removes crosslinks altogether from phase 0. Funny enough, crosslinks and the updating of crosslinks and the calculation of rewards for crosslinks was one of our biggest source of consensus errors at interop, so it'd be nice to just remove it anyway. So anyway, there's this PR up for review. It's been under review for about a week, and I think we're very close to merging it in and releasing it as an 09. When we get to the testnet discussion, we can discuss the implications on testnets, which version we should be testing, and testnets and things like that. Beyond the phase 1 modifications and things, Are there any other research updates that anyone wants to share?
I've been thinking about kind of phase 1 spec issues and how to kind of optimize beacon blocks more, how to calculate data availability routes, and a couple of other things. I have a couple of open issues out, but generally, nothing kind of especially hard has come out yet so far. I think like a lot of it is basically just like how problems about how do we pack bytes together. Um, Otherwise, yeah, like I don't see any super fundamental problems. Maybe the more fundamental problem, well, not even fundamental, but just difficulties are more kind of phase 2 related ones, like how to actually do like guaranteed cross shard movement of ETH between shards, for example. And there like basically there's challenges there that have to do with like, do we want to kind of force every shard to communicate with every other shard in every slot? Do we want to have that be more of a second level process, and so on and so forth? But that's kind of still thinking. I guess right now I'm still trying to come up with simplifications and optimizations to the existing phase 1 design, and still kind of have my eyes and ears open for any potential challenges that we haven't thought about, because I'm expecting other people to come in with their own opinions about like how particular things should be architected eventually.
Cool. Thanks, Vitalik. Other research updates?
One update which is relevant to phase 0, I guess, is like BLS signatures. So on the standardization, I'd say we're in a very good place. The spec really hasn't changed for the last several months, with the exception, I guess, of which is of note of a very minor kind of security bug, which should be a very easy fix, like a one-line change. Ryad, who is the author of one of the authors of the Wabi Bonnet hash function that we're using, is doing an amazing job in terms of taking ownership of the standardization effort, lots of polishing. He's also addressed various patents, possible patent infringements, and suggested the workarounds for those. And in November, between the 16th and the 22nd of November, there's going to be a meeting, a CFRG meeting with the various people involved in the standardization. And at that point, I guess the spec, can be considered, very frozen, I guess. Another update on the BLS stuff is there's this library called Hirumi, and it's authored and maintained by Shigeo Mitsunari, who came to DEF CON and met some of the Prism guys, and like it turns out that this library seems to be like significantly faster than other libraries like Milagro, the Zcash library. So like a recent benchmark from the Lighthouse people suggest that it's 2.4 times faster than Milagro. So we're in touch with the author, and we're considering a possible grant. One of the complaints that have had in the past is that the integration with various languages has been not so easy. So working on simplifying the integration for Rust and Java and maybe even more languages will be a priority. he also thinks he can make his library even faster. So right now his pairings take 0.6 milliseconds, but he thinks he can shave off 10 to 20%. And it'll also be good, I guess, for him to implement a really fast version of the Wabi-Bonnet hash function. And there's also the possibility of doing formal verification on this specific library, which was floated around. One piece of good news is that Guido, in terms of fuzzing, has come back. So he had to do a bunch of other stuff, but now he's available again. And so he's actually currently working on fuzzing the Hirumi library. And a final update on the BLS stuff. There's kind of been a very interesting paper recently by Mary Mala, where she describes a technique to aggregate signatures in such a way that the aggregated signature is cheap to verify. So when you have n distinct messages, or regardless of n, you only have to pay 2 pairings to verify the aggregated signature, and kind of roughly 2n exponentiations. So that may or may not be something that's relevant for layer 1. I mean, it's still very exciting, but something to keep in mind at layer 2 or for live clients. I mean, it's a very recent paper, so I guess we need a bit more time to digest it. I mean, also in terms of quick updates for the deposit contract, formal verification should, I guess, end maybe in a couple of weeks. So there's still one minor point regarding removing some of the safety checks, and we should get a kind of a final okay on those within a couple of weeks. There's also kind of discussions about how we want to design the website to make the deposits. So yeah, still I guess significant work to be done before we want to deploy the deposit contract. We want to do lots of testing, make sure that the UI is good, and I guess we also don't want to be in a situation where validators make deposits too early on and they have their funds in the deposit contract without being able to use them. So I guess there's also no significant rush to deploy, at least until maybe we have some sort of public cross-client testnet.
Cool. Thanks, Justin. Any other research updates?
Should I say something here, or is it better spot later for White Block?
I have networking slotted at next, so
okay.
Yeah, just go. We'll get through this first.
You want to do question maybe? Or okay, go ahead.
Just a quick question. So Justin, could you please spell the name of the library that you mentioned?
Sure, yeah, it's Hirumi, Herumi, and the specific pairing library is called MCL. And yeah, the author is also the author of an optimized x86 assembly JIT, and he's basically using this to get the performance that he got.
All right, thank you.
Do we know if he has any plans for ARM, by the way?
Yeah, so ARM is already supported. So you don't have to use his x86 tooling. You can just use LLVM, and that will compile to ARM. You have a small performance penalty. So if I recall, on ARM, it's 0.8 milliseconds per pairing. versus x86, which is 0.6 milliseconds.
Cool.
Okay, brief update about SSE. So SSE itself is not really changing. However, I'm pulling out some of the specs out the specs repository and drafting this new repository which covers SSE in a more complete way and tries and implement a change control process and a standardization staging process. This should help standardize partials and other experimental features going forward. And I know ChainSafe is working on light clients as well, and I hope to work with them on trying and standardizing this. And maybe ChainSafe wants to cover something about their light clients call.
Yeah. So we're setting up a ChainSafe is setting up a monthly light client call, kind of like a working group or a task force of sorts for light clients. The goal is to make sure that light clients don't get left behind, and really, I think it's to coordinate bringing light client tech for ETH1 and ETH2, eventually ETH2 into production. So we're going to be exploring like research and development updates, open questions, and like there's some technical problems to work through, but I think a lot of the issue is social. And so having like a regular meeting where we can kind of just all sync through the bigger issues and coordinate will be really helpful. And so we'll post on all the relevant channels in the next few days, like when we have a solid agenda. But I think we're going to be targeting in 2 or 3 weeks for the first call, and we'll be collecting community feedback and all that.
Cool. That sounds great. And Proto, yeah, I'm supportive of pulling SSE out into its own spec. I think we've run into a couple times where altering the SSE spec in the context of the other spec, it was like unclear. You know, it became more and more clear that it should just be its own thing, and that our spec just points to a particular version of. So good. Okay, cool. Research updates. Anything else? Okay. Moving on to networking updates. I have a PR out for the naive attestation aggregation proposal, in which validators locally aggregate with no necessarily sophisticated strategy, but on subnets before attestations are passed to a shared, more global network. This is definitely like the bones of something is in place, but we need some back and forth between some of the people who have been thinking about the networking problems. So if you are on the networking side of things, take a look at this PR and give me some feedback. Cool. Felix actually just joined us, so I don't have to give his Discovery V5 update. Felix, would you like to give us an update?
Yeah. Can you actually hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So we made some really good changes to the spec just this week. So there's now a lot more documentation about the topic index, which is well, kind of like the big thing. I haven't been on the call for a while, so more news is that the Go and Rust implementations are now interoperable for the basic sort of DHG. I don't really know where the Python implementation is at right now. Like I haven't checked recently. I think my last, like to my knowledge, Yannick was working on implementing the wire protocol still, but that might have changed. And I also know that since DEF CON that the Java team has been working on implementing the wire protocol in Java, and they actually got pretty far with that, but I haven't actually tested this yet. And then there are two open problems right now in the protocol that we still need to solve before we can consider freezing the spec for the first time. One problem is the topic radius estimation isn't really all that well defined in the spec right now, and that's because we don't really have a super good solution for this. I expect that we will find solution to this problem when we actually implement it a second time. Like we have an implementation of the radius estimation, but the code is horrible and it's actually not really clear if this is a workable solution, and I didn't really want to document that in spec. So I do think there is a simple and good way to do topic radius estimation, but we just don't really have it yet. And then the other thing that came up during the audit, which is about to be done. So basically, there was a bit of a pause around DEF CON with the audit because I couldn't get back to give feedback um, on the sort of like initial report that they created. But I have given that feedback now, so they will come back in a couple of days, I guess, or 2 weeks, and deliver the final report, and that one will also be published. And the biggest issue in the audit that they that the least authority was trying to get through is basically that we should be adding some sort of proof of work system on node identities, and it's something that I didn't really want to do. I even put that in the spec. Thanks, Danny, by the way, for posting the references to the stuff that I'm talking about. So the proof of work on node identities is a pretty old idea. This is something that was even present in the Escademlia system, and I think by now we basically have like two options for it. So we could use Equihash or we could use Koku Cycle, and I've been trying to I play around with the Kaku cycle and making it sort of like integrating it into the protocol in code. But yeah, I'm not super happy about this change, to be honest. So I think it's still what I would really like to have is like some more solid feedback from other people who are more knowledgeable about proof of work, or just in general. I mean, I guess we just kind of have to make a decision whether we actually want proof of work in this protocol or not. So this is kind of like the big thing that's still out. Should we even do this in the first place? And if yes, then you like which parameters and all that stuff. So if anyone has any idea, like any opinion on this at all, you can like the issue that Danny linked is basically the place to discuss that. And that's it.
On the proof of work topic, I can just quickly mention that from Status's side, one of the biggest reasons we're abandoning Whisper is basically that as a spam mechanism, spam prevention mechanism, it doesn't quite work. Simply because node power. So the node doing the work honestly is almost always going to be underpowered relative to an attacker, which makes it very much useless.
So it's a bit different in with this type of thing because like the issue with proof of work for the discovery or more general, this isn't just for discovery really. It's more like in general, like do we want our nodes to like add proof of work on their identity? It's kind of something that like if you have it, what this actually prevents is basically attackers choosing their node identity in an arbitrary way to because a lot of things in discovery, but also in general, a lot of peer-to-peer algorithms rely on just having the node ID space sort of like uniformly distributed, and attackers can actually influence the distribution by choosing their node IDs. So if you add proof of work, then basically an attacker would have to perform proof of work many times, whereas a node that just doesn't care about its ID and just wants a random ID, it would have to perform the proof of work one time. So it's a bit different than with the Whisper system where you have to put proof of work on every single message. So in that case, you do have to spend a significant amount of resources just computing proof of work all the time. But with the node identities, it's like a one-time setup thing where like it runs the first time you start the node and then probably never again. So it's kind of, I do think like proof of work isn't all that bad in that context. Like in the context of node identities, it's just something that we really have to decide on and like make a good decision about. But please do check this issue.
Thanks.
Felix, do you have a list of scenarios for the interop process that you had with Rust?
Nah, so basically what we did is mostly like we just ran the clients against each other, and then H did most of the work, really, which was like just basically checking in his code where things went wrong, and that led to a couple corrections in the spec and like a couple corrections in the goal. And so right now, it was like an interactive debugging kind of thing, more or less. So you can just run the implementation and like send a ping message and then see if you get a response. And if you do get a response, you can see if you can decrypt it. But I am very certain that both Rust and Go are now compliant with the spec. So like 100%. So it's kind of, if you try either implementation and it works with yours, then we're good, basically.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, I have some questions and thoughts on the proof of work, but we can take that to the issue instead. Thanks, Felix. Okay, on to more networking things. White Block, y'all have an update?
Yeah, it's just pretty brief. We started, or we released the repo of our testing methodologies for what we're doing with P2P. So we're laying out basically what we're going to do, the specific methods, and just some metrics that we hope to collect. I'll drop both the discussion and the repo. We've already got some good stuff going there, so we'd love to have more people though. So if you have any thoughts or would like to see how we're testing things, please join us there.
We have some data already that we'll be sharing.
Cool. Excited to see it play out. Thanks, Trenton. Is there anything else networking related?
If I can ask the Nimbus team, by the way, since I was talking, would it be possible for us to get access to the organization GitHub with the scripts as well? I think it was there.
Yes, of course.
Thank you, guys. My GitHub ID is 8. Sorry, I got a pretty bad cold.
Just send it to one of us over some, Telegram or whatever.
All right, thanks.
Cool. Okay. Next up, we have testnet discussion. So there's a lot here. There's a lot of different things going on that affect when and what types of testnets happen at what point. One of the big things is this phase 0 update, the pending v09, which will include this modification to the state transition function. It is almost entirely simplifying in that it's cutting a few things out. And I think Terrence has gone, as he said, has gone through it. And when I was writing it, it felt like it wouldn't be too bad on your end. But that will be, we shall see. But I did have a few conversations with different teams, and it seemed like the general desire and consensus was to get these changes out on the spec, get them integrated into clients before we do some sort of larger, more orchestrated multi-client testnets. It also seemed that most teams, some teams have the ETH1 to ETH2 machinery. Most teams are kind of like ironing out that deposit contract following ETH1 data voting, etc., and doing some more single client testnet stuff, both larger private testnets, and I think some teams are planning on spinning up some either public testnets or semi-public testnets, maybe where the majority of nodes are controlled by the client team. And on these testnets, although maybe dominated by a single client, might do some multi-client testing. So that's my general understanding of where things lie. Is to there's plenty of work to be done with respect to kind of single clients moving forward towards testnets while we get these phase 0 changes integrated. Are there any additional thoughts, any opposing thoughts on testnets, just in general?
I mean, we'd love to be able to run some of that in conjunction by ourselves or with everybody else. So we have an easy way to spin up a bunch of instances as part of the run. What's the timeline? Do we want to use Girly like Prism does? Is there one deposit contract or multiple? Do we have an anchor on that?
Right. So
I can get us lots of ETH for Girly, by the way.
Fucking
Sure,
girly whale. Pardon my French.
Always want some more ETH.
In terms of getting ETH from the testnets, one suggestion is just to make the deposit amount be 32 milli ETH as opposed to 32 ETH, and that would make it very easy to get Ether.
Right.
Oh, but Justin, but we've got millions though, because like we are the faucet, so like.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, so we can fully fund the ETH2 contract and run a full sim if we really wanted to.
Great.
I also saw some clients that had some limitations around if you use a different amount, sometimes it doesn't work. There's enough finicky stuff inside the client. It sometimes end up like hard coding 32, or there were some issues there way back in June when I did that the first time. So if we can just step that, it's not really interesting to just test that particular functionality at this point. It's just going to waste a little bit of time. But if we can go with 32, I'm good with that. I have about 2,000 Girly ETH if somebody wants them. And one more thing, the Prism contract, and Terence should speak about that, has a clause in it where you can also drain the amounts back to your original sender. So it's not like you're losing ETH.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And to the question of whether it's one deposit contract or multiple, it's essentially one per testnet that is connected to an ETH1 chain. There was also discussion about spinning up proof of authority nets. I think just generally connecting to Girly is probably simpler than doing that, but it's definitely something we can consider, especially when we actually move towards public testnets and maybe incentivize testnets. A proof of authority net might work better because we can better allocate the ETH that can participate, but that's a little bit further down the line. Zahari, you have your hand raised.
One idea that I'd like to share is we are planning to do our testnets in the following way. We will use the validators from the mock start to kickstart the network immediately. And the very first block will reference some current block on Goerli. So the validator contract could be used to add additional validators, but the network is already running. It doesn't. You don't need to wait for everybody to deposit funds and to become a validator. And we can probably publish some kind of common command line parameters similar to the mock start. And if the other clients are interested as well, I think this could simplify the initial cross-client testing.
Yeah, that does sound like a good idea. If you can share your notes on it, we can, like you said, put something together like the mock start for interop.
There's another few things to discuss regarding the config. So for us, we actually ended up increasing the ejection balance just for once we want to test our validators getting ejected. And the second thing we're seeing is that there's people trying out, but people ended up leaving the client running for like too long, or that people go offline for too long. And then setting threshold as half is a little too low, and then it starts to hurt our finality. So that's one config that we had to change. And the second config we had to change was the ETH1 follow distance. We set from 1024 to 16 just because we don't want to have people wait too long to be activated. And yeah.
Right. Maybe it's worth either modifying the minimal config to have a couple of those changes, or to add a new one just called like minimal testnet or something, so that we can easily share that.
Yeah, we should probably try and decide on how we're going to structure the fork for these test nets, just so that as we get closer to Genesis, like we don't end up with a thing where people like use their testnet keys on mainnet and get slashed.
Right. Indeed. So you're suggesting starting with a fork version that's way out of the domain.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, like it's probably pretty unlikely, but it seems like a good idea. Yeah, maybe we like start from the rightmost bit for big endian, and then the leftmost bit. I don't know, something.
Yeah.
Just get it way out of the range of the forks we expect to use.
Yeah, that's a good call. Is that? I don't know if that value is in the config, right? I think we're just using the default value for Genesis of 0.
Yeah,
okay.
I think so. We put it in our spec, but I can't remember if it's in the main spec or not.
Yeah, it might be worth adding to config so we can just have that as a parameter in our testnet configs.
Okay. There are a couple more things here. It's not really enough to just get the nodes going. We'll need to monitor and make sure that they're running okay. So I know Zahar, you mentioned that we could run Grafana for testnet for the node that they run. For ourselves, we can definitely run Prometheus as part of our monitoring. Would that be enough, or is there a specific tooling that we should develop to help with monitoring testnets, these type of things? What's the thinking here?
Our own setup is based on the Prometheus spec that was published regarding standard metrics, and we use Prometheus and Grafana only as a presentation layer.
Is that going to be enough, or do we need to do a bit more? Or what do people think on that?
So that just allows you to monitor singular nodes, right, Zahari? Or is that... No, that sends it to... That's multiple nodes to a single place?
No. Yeah, you can do as many as you like.
I mean, we have some custom setup because we don't want to expose this Prometheus port to the open internet. So in our own environment, we have a kind of custom setup to gather and aggregate all the data in a single place. But I think this is up to for everyone to implement on their own.
Right. I definitely think that's a good start. There's a push on Protocol Lab side. They're doing some more rigorous gossip sub and pub sub monitoring tools. I don't know the timeline on that though. Greg, I think you looked at that proposal.
Okay.
Is that something on y'all's radar? Is Greg still here?
I think Greg left.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, in terms of general tooling, one thing I did want to mention is that we're building a few little helper applications.
Oui.
Hold on, somebody else is speaking. Okay. We're building a few like monitoring applications. We have like a gossip tub sniffer and a few of these things, and I expect that eventually there will be a community that steps up around block explorers and stuff like this that will also have similar things, but say on the web, right? So those are probably interesting to investigate.
Yeah, there was some nascent interest many months ago on block explorers. I can knock on some doors and see if we can get that moving again.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So I also know Prism had a good setup with Spinnaker because they were able to do canary deployment testing, all that good stuff. So we spun up a Spinnaker as well. We could organize around that as well. Is that something that people would be interested in?
What is a Spinnaker?
Spinnaker is a. I'm sorry, my voice is just bad. So Spinnaker is a CI/CD pipeline integration that takes a new build, has a workflow for that build. You know, for example, you can test it in isolation in 3-6 nodes. Look at the stats, look at the results, see if it's good, see if it's passing the sleeve test in a way, and then is going to make it possible to replace the existing nodes in the testnet with a new version in an automatic failover manner without downtime. So if we had 6 clients, 6 different 6 nodes per client, and Spinnaker workflows for each of them, every time you push a new Docker image, it would be built, picked up, be tested in isolation using the tooling from Proto, for example, making sure it's working, all that good stuff. And then once you have like the green light from different programs, you can introduce it into the testnet, and it becomes an automated pipeline. Makes it much easier for people to manage that over time.
Like one concern I would raise with these tools is that they're very centered on a centralized approach to managing nodes and sort of almost like, they're good for cloud and software as a service, and that's not quite what we're targeting here. So
well, hang on. Hey, you're going too fast on me. One is, it doesn't have to be the same testnet. Even if it's part of the testnet, it doesn't have to be the majority of the testnet. It can be just a client decides to do that way, right? And it doesn't affect the whole. It should not be the end and all of a testnet. Like if you happen to be using the same contract, right, and you're running independently, you should not be at all penalized or having to interact with Spinnaker at all. It's just a way clients may choose to deploy and run their nodes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. As long as we also consider the fact that like eventually people will not be using these systems, so we should have perhaps that use case in mind as well.
I think you need both. I think if you want to have a painless approach to being able to deploy things automatically, get some updates by email that your stuff is working on out, and it's much easier to have a continuous deployment perspective where you can test things over time. You can also do crazy experiments and see if your experimental PR is working the way you thought or if it's breaking the network, right? So, and by the way, I'm not inventing anything. This is what Prism uses today as part of their testnet.
I think for us, it's more about gating the testnet quality. Just we don't want like PRs that goes in and then end up breaking the testnet. So the workflow is more like when a PR is merged to master, right, and then a new image is cut. So then the image deployed to cluster, and then we'll direct 10% of the traffic to that image. And then we have 3 hours of measuring report to compare the baseline between the new image and the old image, and then we'll do some analysis. And then if that passes, then we can direct more and more traffic to that new image. Yeah.
So this is primarily on testnets in which you control the majority of the nodes, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, for us. Yes.
Which. Okay. Cool. Okay. So we have phase 0 integrations for the new stuff. Continue forward on single client testnets, related tooling, some multi-client tests against these single client testnets, and I will write up a bunch of stuff on some shared testnets that I'll share with you all before the next call, and that's what we can talk in the next call. Cool.
Can we talk about
Yeah.
aggregation strategy for multi-client testnet? So I think for single client testnet, it doesn't matter, right? Each client can basically use their own strategy. But for multi-client testnet, people will be interested to implement the naive aggregation strategy mentioned in the PR for it.
Yeah, pretty much. Once we have any amount of significant load on the testnet, we're going to need an aggregation strategy. Even up until the point where you have, as long as if you have a single channel in which everything's being gossiped, you don't strictly need an explicit strategy other than aggregate locally and include in blocks. But I think the intent is to get some version of this naive strategy integrated, and when multi-client testnets come around, I think that certainly should be, we should move towards that. Pretty much, we should, as soon as we can, on any of the interop versus mainnet components, we should be moving towards mainnet as soon as possible. This includes aggregation strategies, SecIO versus noise. Can't remember if there's anything else in there. So yeah, I plan on getting that. We need to get that merged in soon and tested and onto these testnets. To that end, again, I'm seeking input and feedback on that proposal, that PR. Okay. We'll pick up this conversation in 2 weeks and hopefully see some interesting updates with respect to single client testing until then. I do think that we should continue talking about how we do plan on visualizing, monitoring, and understand these nets. So maybe let's pick up an issue or two in the PM repo. I'll start something there. Cool. Same with that proposal from, I think it was Zahari, with respect to how we might more sanely kick off these test nets while still accepting new deposits from each one.
Yes, I'll make an issue in the PM. Okay.
Great. Thank you. All right. Let's move on. Any general spec discussion? As discussed multiple times on this, there's the phase 0 changes. which will help us help facilitate this new proposal, new phase 1 proposal. Any questions on that, or any questions or comments on spec in general? Great. Clear as day. Or water, or whatever they say. Okay, open discussion. Any closing comments?
Happy Halloween.
Yes, indeed. Okay, cool. Thanks, guys. We'll talk to y'all on the internet, and plan on having a call 2 weeks from today. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.